The hospital corridors were eerily quiet that day, an unusual calm in a place typically filled with the chaotic energy of life and death. Nurses moved quickly, yet gently, their footsteps muffled against the polished floors. Families huddled in waiting rooms, exchanging whispered prayers and tears. In one room, the air was thick with despair. A small boy named Liam lay motionless in a hospital bed, his fragile body surrounded by beeping machines and blinking monitors. His parents, Sarah and David, stood nearby, holding hands tightly as if their shared strength could somehow hold him back from the brink of death. The doctors had done all they could. The treatments had failed. Every medication, every procedure, every desperate attempt to save Liam had come up short. The boy's condition had deteriorated to the point where hope seemed like a cruel illusion. "Prepare yourselves," the lead physician had said solemnly. "There's nothing more we can do." The words echoed in Sarah's mind, a haunting refrain that made her knees weak and her heart feel like it was shattering into pieces. In their desperation, Sarah and David reached out to the hospital chaplain, asking if a priest could come to offer Liam his last rites. They had grown up in faith, but had found it harder to believe in miracles as life wore on. Still, they clung to the hope that perhaps in these final moments, their son might find peace. The chaplain made the call, and soon Father Michael arrived. Father Michael was a humble man, his face lined with years of devotion and quiet compassion. As he stepped into the hospital room, his presence seemed to bring a subtle shift in the atmosphere. There was something about him, an unexplainable calm that seemed to envelop everyone present. He greeted the parents with a soft, reassuring voice and walked to Liam's bedside, his every movement deliberate and filled with a sense of reverence. The sight of the little boy lying there, pale and still, struck Father Michael deeply. He had performed last rites many times before, but this case felt different. He couldn't quite explain why, but there was an unshakable feeling in his heart that he was here for a reason, far greater than he could comprehend. He took a deep breath, silently asking for guidance, and reached into his bag to retrieve his anointing oils and prayer book. As Father Michael began to pray, his voice was steady, filled with an intensity that seemed to rise from a place beyond mere words. His prayer wasn't just a recital of Holy Scripture, it was a heartfelt plea. He prayed not only for Liam's soul but also for the healing of the family standing before him. He asked for strength, for mercy, for a miracle. As the words flowed, he placed his hand gently on Liam's forehead, his fingers trembling slightly from the weight of the moment. It was then that something unexpected happened. Liam's chest rose in a slow, deep breath, a stark contrast to the shallow, mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. The priest didn't notice it immediately, so focused was he on his prayer, but Sarah's gasp broke his concentration. Father Michael opened his eyes to see the boy's tiny hand twitch, the faintest of movements, but enough to send shockwaves through the room. The medical staff rushed in, alerted by the commotion. Nurses checked the monitors, their eyes widening as they noticed subtle but significant changes. Liam's heart rate, which had been erratic, began to stabilize. His oxygen levels improved ever so slightly. One nurse placed a hand over her mouth, her expression a mix of shock and wonder. Father Michael stepped back, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Had his prayer actually made a difference? Or was this a coincidence, a random flicker of life in a body that was otherwise fading away? He glanced at Sarah and David, who clung to each other, tears streaming down their faces. "It's a sign," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It has to be." Despite the commotion, Liam remained unconscious, but the air in the room felt different now, lighter, warmer, filled with a palpable sense of hope. Father Michael, still holding his prayer book, looked up toward the heavens and silently thanked God. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt certain he had been part of something extraordinary. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of astonishment and cautious hope. Liam's improvement, though slight at first, was undeniable. Nurses bustled in and out of the room, their professionalism unable to mask the wonder in their eyes as they watched the boy's vitals steadily improve. What had seemed impossible just hours ago was now unfolding before them. The doctors, who had long resigned themselves to an outcome they could not change, were called back to reassess his condition. Dr. Evans, the lead physician, was among the first to examine Liam after the unexpected turn of events. A man of science and reason, he prided himself on finding logical explanations for every medical mystery. Yet, as he reviewed the latest test results and observed the boy himself, he found his certainty shaken. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Liam's vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels were all showing signs of steady normalization. For a child who had been declared beyond saving just hours earlier, this was nothing short of remarkable. The family stood to the side, clutching each other as they watched the scene unfold. Sarah, her hands trembling, whispered, Is he getting better?" She didn't dare say the word miracle, but the thought lingered heavily in her mind. David nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the monitors as if willing the numbers to climb higher. Father Michael remained in the corner of the room, silently observing the developments. His heart was full, but his mind raced with questions. He had witnessed small moments of divine intervention in his years of service. Prayers answered in unexpected ways, unexplainable recoveries. But this felt different. This felt monumental. He found himself praying again, not just for Liam, but for everyone in the room, that they might see this moment for what it truly was, a testament to faith and the mysterious workings of the divine. As the night wore on, Liam began to show even more signs of recovery. His fingers twitched, and his eyelids fluttered. These small movements were enough to send waves of excitement through the room. The nurses, who had been so sure they would be turning off the machines by now, exchanged glances filled with hope and disbelief. One of them, a young woman named Clara, whispered to Father Michael, "Do you think it's a miracle?" The priest looked at her, his kind eyes filled with quiet conviction. "I believe," he said softly, "that miracles happen when we least expect them." By morning, the impossible had become undeniable. Liam opened his eyes. His gaze was unfocused at first, but as Sarah leaned over him, calling his name through her tears, a spark of recognition appeared. "Mom," he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper, but enough to make everyone in the room freeze. Sarah and David both burst into tears, their emotions overwhelming as they clung to their son. The doctors struggled to explain the turnaround. Dr. Evans convened an emergency meeting with his team, poring over Liam's medical history and the timeline of his recovery. "There has to be an explanation," he insisted, though his tone lacked its usual authority. "Something we missed. A late reaction to the treatments, an unrecorded anomaly?" His colleagues nodded along, but their expressions betrayed their doubt. Deep down, even the most skeptical among them couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Word of Liam's recovery spread quickly throughout the hospital. Staff from other floors found excuses to pass by his room, stealing glances at the boy who had defied every prediction. Patients in the nearby rooms, many of whom had overheard the family's earlier cries of despair, now listened to the sounds of joyful laughter and prayer spilling from the room. Liam's story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, there was room for the unexpected. Father Michael, too, found himself at the center of the growing attention. Patients and staff alike sought him out, asking him to pray for their loved ones, or simply to share his perspective on what had happened. He remained humble, always pointing back to God as the source of the miracle. "I was just the vessel," he would say. "The power comes from a much higher place." As Liam continued to improve, the hospital became a place of renewed hope. The story of the priest's prayer and the boy's miraculous recovery began to circulate far beyond its walls. Reporters reached out to the family, eager to share their story with the world. Sarah and David, though overwhelmed, agreed to speak, hoping that their experience might inspire others to hold on to faith even in the darkest of times. And through it all, Liam's small but steady progress became a daily reminder that life's most extraordinary moments often come when they are least expected. News of Liam's recovery spread like wildfire, first through the hospital and then out into the wider community. It began with whispers among the staff, nurses sharing the story during breaks, doctors exchanging puzzled but awestruck conversations in the corridors. Soon, patients in other rooms were asking about the boy who came back to life, and visitors in the waiting areas shared snippets of the story they had overheard. By the end of the day, Liam's name was known to almost everyone in the building. Outside the hospital, the story took on a life of its own. Sarah and David had shared their gratitude with a local reporter, who happened to be visiting a nearby patient when Liam's miraculous recovery began to unfold. The journalist, moved by the raw emotion and the undeniable strangeness of the event, wrote an article that was soon published online. The headline read, "Dying Boy Defies Odds After Priest's Prayer, a Miracle in Our Midst." Within hours, the article had gone viral, shared thousands of times by people seeking inspiration in a world that often felt full of hardship and despair. At the hospital, Liam's room became a focal point for hope. People came by just to stand outside the door, some whispering prayers of their own. Strangers brought cards, flowers, and even small toys for the boy, though he was still too weak to fully enjoy them. Sarah and David were overwhelmed by the kindness of people they had never met. Their gratitude mixed with a sense of disbelief at how quickly their private pain had become a public story. Father Michael, too, found himself thrust into the spotlight in a way he had never anticipated. The priest was a quiet, humble man, accustomed to offering comfort in times of need without drawing attention to himself. But now he couldn't walk through the hospital without someone stopping him to ask for a blessing or to hear the story from his perspective. The hospital chaplain, seeing the influx of requests for Father Michael, remarked, "It seems you've become something of a celebrity, Father." Father Michael only smiled gently and replied, "It's not about me. It never was. I was just a witness to something greater than all of us." Yet, even with his modesty, the priest couldn't help but reflect on the magnitude of what had happened. He had always believed in miracles, but to be part of one was an experience that defied even his deepest understanding of faith. He spent his days praying with families, talking to staff who wanted to make sense of what they had witnessed, and offering his quiet but unwavering support to those who needed it most. His presence became a source of peace for many, and his faith seemed to inspire everyone he encountered. Meanwhile, Liam's recovery became a symbol of resilience and hope for the entire community. Churches in the area began holding special services dedicated to sharing stories of faith and renewal, often mentioning Liam's miraculous recovery as a centerpiece. Social media platforms were flooded with posts from people recounting their own experiences with unexplainable events, and the hashtag #BarkLiamsMiracle began trending. People who had never prayed before found themselves whispering words of gratitude or asking for strength in their own lives. In the hospital, a remarkable shift took place. Doctors, nurses, and staff who had been hardened by years of witnessing suffering began to look at their work with new eyes. Clara, the young nurse who had been present during Father Michael's initial prayer, admitted to her colleagues that she had nearly quit her job before that day. "I felt like everything we did was just delaying the inevitable," she confessed. "But seeing Liam wake up, it reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. It reminded me that there's always hope, even when it seems like there's none." The change wasn't limited to the hospital staff. Patients who had been struggling with their own illnesses or despair found inspiration in Liam's story. A young woman undergoing chemotherapy wrote in her journal, "If Liam could come back from the brink, maybe I can get through this too." An elderly man recovering from surgery asked his family to bring him a rosary, saying, "I think it's time I started believing again." For Liam's family, the attention was both a blessing and a challenge. They were deeply moved by the outpouring of support, but also found it overwhelming. Reporters camped outside the hospital, eager for updates. People from all walks of life reached out to them, sharing their own stories of struggle and faith. Sarah, in particular, felt the weight of representing something so much larger than herself. "We're just ordinary people," she told Father Michael one evening, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "We're not sure we're ready for all of this." Father Michael placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. "The miracle isn't just for you. It's for everyone who needs to see that light can shine in even the darkest moments. Take it one day at a time. The rest will follow." As Liam continued to recover, his family's gratitude only deepened. Sarah and David began attending church again, something they hadn't done in years. "We've been given a second chance," David said. "Not just with Liam, but with everything. Our faith, our family, it all feels new again." The ripple effects of Liam's story extended far beyond the walls of the hospital. It touched lives across the community and beyond, reminding people of the power of hope, the importance of connection, and the possibility of miracles. It wasn't just about one boy's recovery. It was about the way his story brought people together, inspiring them to believe in something greater than themselves. For Liam, for his family, and for everyone who heard the story, life would never be the same. Liam's recovery was more than just a medical marvel. It became a profound turning point in the lives of everyone involved. For the young boy himself, the journey back to health was slow and steady. Though he remained fragile at first, each passing day brought new signs of strength. He began to sit up, then to move around with the help of physical therapists. Every small milestone, a laugh, a step, a word, was met with cheers and tears from his family and the hospital staff who had grown attached to him. For Sarah and David, Liam's parents, life took on a deeper sense of gratitude and purpose. They found themselves reflecting on the fragility of life and the incredible gift they had been given. "We thought we'd lost him," Sarah often said, her voice thick with emotion, "and now every moment feels like a miracle." They began documenting Liam's recovery, not for publicity, but as a way to hold on to every precious detail of this second chance they had been given. They filled journals with their thoughts, took endless pictures, and captured videos of Liam's progress. Each memory felt like a treasure. As Liam grew stronger, his parents felt a calling to give back. They began visiting other families in the hospital, sharing their story and offering support to those who were struggling with their own challenges. "We know what it's like to feel hopeless," David would say. "But if Liam taught us anything, it's that you can't give up, even when it feels like there's nothing left to hold on to." Their words of encouragement often brought tears to the eyes of parents sitting beside their children's beds, reminding them that miracles, big and small, were always possible. For Father Michael, the experience had been equally transformative. The priest had always been a man of deep faith, but witnessing Liam's recovery firsthand filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. His days became busier as people from near and far sought him out, hoping to experience the same grace that had touched Liam and his family. Father Michael welcomed each person with the same gentle humility that had defined his life's work, but he was careful to remind them that he was just a conduit for something far greater. "Miracles don't happen because of me," he would often say. "They happen because of faith, love, and the grace of God. I'm simply here to remind you that those things are real." He began hosting special prayer services at his parish, inviting anyone who needed hope or healing to attend. These gatherings became a source of comfort and inspiration for countless people. Stories of unexpected recoveries and reconciliations began to surface among those who attended, further reinforcing the sense that something extraordinary was happening in their community. Father Michael never claimed credit for these outcomes, but he found great joy in seeing how Liam's story continued to touch hearts and change lives. Meanwhile, Liam's story began to spread far beyond the local community. News outlets picked up the tale, sharing it on television and online. Interviews with Sarah, David, and Father Michael brought the story into living rooms across the country. People from all walks of life reached out, some sharing their own stories of faith and resilience, while others simply thanked the family for reminding them that hope was still alive in the world. Among those inspired by Liam's recovery were medical professionals. Doctors and nurses who had grown weary of the emotional toll of their work found themselves rejuvenated by the story. Many began to reflect on the ways in which their own skepticism or burnout had dulled their sense of wonder. Liam's case became a subject of study, not just for its medical implications, but for the broader lessons it offered about the interplay between science, faith, and the human spirit. One of the most profound outcomes of Liam's story was the way it brought people together. Communities that had been divided by disagreements or indifference found common ground in the shared belief that something extraordinary had happened. Churches saw an influx of attendees, people seeking to reconnect with their faith or to find meaning in their own struggles. Support groups formed, bringing together individuals who wanted to share their experiences of overcoming adversity. Even skeptics, who might not have believed in miracles, found themselves moved by the love, hope, and resilience that radiated from Liam's story. As Liam grew stronger, his parents began to involve him in their efforts to give back. Together, they visited hospitals, attended fundraisers for pediatric care, and spoke at events to raise awareness about the power of community and faith. Liam, still too young to fully understand the impact he had made, would often smile shyly when people came up to him, calling him a miracle boy. But as he grew older, he began to embrace his role as a symbol of hope, speaking openly about his journey and the love that had surrounded him during his darkest days. The ripple effects of Liam's recovery continued to spread. Charities were founded in his name, raising funds to support families facing similar challenges. A scholarship program was established at the hospital where he had been treated, ensuring that future generations of medical professionals could carry forward the lessons learned from his miraculous recovery. Each of these efforts felt like a testament to the extraordinary power of love, faith, and human connection. For Sarah, David, and Liam, life would never return to the way it had been before that fateful day in the hospital. But they wouldn't have had it any other way. Their journey had changed them in ways they couldn't have imagined, deepening their appreciation for each other and for the community that had embraced them so fully. Liam's story wasn't just about one boy's recovery. It was about the way that recovery had transformed everyone who had been part of it, leaving a legacy of hope and inspiration that would endure for years to come.